This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I think this is probably a having too much time in your hands type problem, but I got a chance to gig my pedal board, which I'd put together. The idea was that I really liked this. I borrowed Ryan Davies' pedal board. This had this Boss what is it called? Anyway, they sent me this, whatever it's called. It's a Boss, you know, like a pedal board type situation. And I got the chance to gig this with my buddy Jake Loosemore on a gig at Lyme Regis, where we gig a lot. And I'd made some changes, so I've added on the Fairchild compressor because I really like what that did. And actually I ended up using that pretty much through the whole gig. Into the Pro Reverb from 1965. There's a few things that I'm thinking, do I even need this on a board? And then there's a couple of things where I'm thinking, actually, there are some things that I want to try. So this is just a video exploring some of that, but in this bit here, you'll just hear basically a combination of tones from the pedal board in this improvised sort of jam. Let me know if you dig any of the tones, like what you think sounds good about it, what doesn't, and what's missing. I added on the Kernom Elipse because I demoed this for them, and I thought I don't actually have a modulation pedal on my board, and never really do. Now, the only time that I actually used it on the gig was during the Fearless Flyers. It's a tune basically where Mark Lettieri has like a phaser on through most of it, so I kind of used it for that, and that was about all. And so I'm wondering, you know, in general, am I a modulation guy? I just think maybe I'm not into modulation. I think if you're familiar with my playing at all, know that I use, you know, a fair amount of gain for stuff and delay and ideally reverb, which we'll come back to later. But to be honest, I'm not generally someone who tends to use like any additional modulation on top of that, because I think, you know, it's already enough processing going on with the tone anyway, so it just feels like to me maybe that could come off the board. You know, am I really making the most of that Kernom Elipse? To be honest, no, it's taking up a bit of space. I mean, on certain gigs, if I knew for sure that I wanted trem, rotary, chorus, flanger, phaser, vibe, then this absolutely has a place. But stuff that I do, I'm not just generally not using modulation, so maybe that one can come off. I like having the EQ here, and how I'm using it generally is actually as like a little bit of a tone shaping thing, and I think an EQ on a board is a good shout in general. But what it also makes me think is, do I therefore need all of these pedals? Because I can use the EQ as a solo boost, and then having the ODR one as well as the 5-watt world bus, I don't necessarily need both. So what I'm generally doing is using like the ODR one and then boosting in front of it for a solo, or those two and then boosting after for a solo. Now, because this is an EQ as well as being able to change the volume, it kind of can do both things really well. And so I could just shape the tone of what I've already got here. The plus basically just gives me more of whichever I'm using, whether it's the ODR one or the 5-watt world bus. And then the EQ I can use to lift things beyond that. Now, off the board as well, I had a volume pedal. But I just feel like I'm sort of in a little bit of a tap dancey situation at this point now. And I don't know if you guys can relate to that at all, where you're like, yeah, I want all of these options. And then when you're playing, you're kind of thinking, well, actually, this is a little bit on the over-the-top side, even though this is like a pretty modest-ish board, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the HX Stomp. So this has like a delay, 2 delays in it, and actually a Glitz reverb. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Could I use something like a switcher in order to have a quick, like, turn off all of the drive type situation? I think that's what I'm wanting, where I can maybe put the drive section into the Quartermaster, and then, you know, when I need to quickly change from a solo tone to like clean, I could just use that and not necessarily have to think about things. So that's something I'm going to experiment with. The other question for me, so I'm really liking the way that this Nobel's delay is sounding, but I'm thinking, actually, maybe reverb is more of a thing that I should be using live, because I've noticed that my tones that I use at home, when I listen back to my playing live in the ensemble, that's French for band, no, it's French for group, innit? Is it even French? I think it's French. My solo tones, to me, sound quite dry in the room.
What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, I gotta know what's
I have spoken to Jake about this, and he was like, yeah, I kind of you know, I think this is one of these things where from using modelers live, you kind of get told a bunch of things which are going to help you to get heard, which don't necessarily apply quite the same when you're using a real amp. And so I've tended to kind of dry things out for live use. And to the point now that when I hear like some playing back from a camera, it's like, actually, that's a little bit drier than I like. And so I'm wondering, instead of delay, maybe reverb is what I'm missing, and that sort of bloom that comes to the note. So those are two things that I've now sort of thought, right, what can I do here? So I'm thinking maybe the Kernom Elipse gets switched out for a reverb, or I could use the reverb in HX Stomp, which is, the glitz reverb is what I use anyway. I mean, I could experiment with that right now, but that's what I'm thinking. The delay, the Nobel's delay, I'm actually really liking it. It's the Del Mini. I use it in tape mode. To me, it sounds really pretty decent, so no complaints about that. But that's what I think, is that I want to switch things out quickly, so that if I'm suddenly thinking, right, I don't want the drive section in anymore, the Quartermaster can be engaged and I can have like a quick clean or a quick drive. Does that make sense to anyone else out there? And how would you go about switching this sort of thing? Because I do have also like a MIDI automated switcher, and I've had Carl Martin Octa switch and that stuff. The only thing I don't like about that so much is it kind of locks you in. So something that I've not tried before is having all of the drives like in one loop of a switcher, and then being able to just switch them out in one go. That's maybe what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking anyway, so I'm going to need to do a bit more thinking about that. If you've got any great ideas on this, do feel free to shoot me an email, because I might not get into the comments for a while. Such as it is hard to do that sort of stuff and be a dad. But anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So let me know your thoughts. And have you had the same sorts of things going on where it's like, right, actually my live tone is a little bit drier than I'd like, and maybe delay is actually not the friend. Maybe reverb could be the friend for live use, particularly I'm thinking really for solo tones, whereas, you know, for rhythm and clean, loads of reverb I don't think is preferable, but for my lead tones I'd actually like a bit more of that kind of blooming thing, which I think can come from reverb. Anyway, yes. Also, can you relate to this idea of always your pedal board kind of not really being where you want it? I think I can.